All right, guys, this is your third lesson in ecosystems. You should be pretty used to this by now. What you're going to do is, as usual, pause the video when you need to so you can get this stuff into your notes. There's your title there. You don't have to write down the stuff that you see in the bottom. Just take a title right here, and then we'll move on. But we are going to talk about producers, consumers, carnivores, herbivores, that stuff. Something I think that most teachers do cover in some grade in elementary school. So let's move me here for now. And let's talk about energy movement and ecosystems. So we can examine the energy flow by categorizing living things by their trophic level in their ecosystem. We'll revisit this term later, trophic level. There are three main trophic levels in a food chain: the producers, the primary consumers, and the secondary consumers. Good spot to pause the video here. If you are wanting to look at this picture a little bit more closely, that's fine. There are producers, there are consumers, there are primary consumers, secondary consumers in there. But for now, we're going to move on. So what are producers? Producers are also known as autotrophs. And the word autotrophs generally means that, well, it exactly means that they make their own food. Examples of these things are plants, algae, some types of bacteria. How are they able to make their own food? Just like we talked about in the last lesson, it's photosynthesis, which is that process by which they take light from the sun, they take carbon dioxide, they take some water, and they make their own sugars, basically, which they burn later for energy to do things. So those are autotrophs. They're producers. They make their own food. Another word for them is autotrophs. No point in dwelling on this slide. You guys pause it when you need to get things down. The primary consumers, also known as heterotrophs, they feed on the producers. So the word primary, that means they're like the first consumers. That means they're herbivores. They feed on the producers. The producers are plants mainly. So these herbivores eat only plants, and that makes them primary consumers. Now, in some cases, we can be considered primary consumers too. If we eat the producers, if we are eating plants, then that makes us primary consumers. So it depends on what food chain you're looking at. The secondary consumers, they rely on the primary consumers. They're also heterotrophs, which means they eat producers and other. They have to eat stuff. They don't make their own food. They rely on primary consumers for their source of energy, but they also depend on the autotrophs in the first trophic level. How do they also depend on them? Well, because the primary consumer has to eat the autotroph, or they have to eat the producer. So that means these secondary consumers must also rely on that. The word omnivore eats both plants and animals, and carnivore only eats other animals. So just to go back, here, those terms: herbivores, things that eat only plants; omnivores eat both plants and animals; and carnivores only eat other animals. That's how they get their energy. And this idea of trophic level comes up again. If we don't, through this lesson, get a good understanding of what these trophic levels are or what that means, then I'll write it out on some sort of whiteboard. Decomposers. Decomposers are organisms that eat dead remains so that the bodies decay. They are very important since they help put nutrients back into the environment. And the way that they do that is when they break down dead things, they put matter back into the atmosphere, but more importantly, back into the soil for plants to use. So they break down dead things. When things rot, that's decomposers breaking them down so that they can go into the atmosphere, into the soil for plants to do their thing. Types of decomposers: scavengers. they eat dead things and break it down physically. Vultures, hyenas, crows. I see turkey vultures all over the place near my house, and they're always eating, well, roadkill mostly. Saprivores, they eat dead remains by breaking it down chemically. Things like bacteria, fungus. You see fungus growing on dead trees that have fallen. There's also bacteria at work there breaking them down. And you can see pictures of that here on the side if you want to. There's mushrooms are a type of fungi, and that's what you can see there. Let me just go back so you can look at that. And there's a hyena eating something dead. And, I don't think I can identify that, but it could be a type of vulture, one I don't recognize. So let's go on to food chains. So food chains indicates a specific feeding pattern to show how energy is transferred from one organism to the next and one trophic level to the next. All right, so for example, we have a plant. The plant is eaten by, I'm going to circle it so you guys can see what I'm looking at. In a typical terrestrial food chain, or an example of a typical terrestrial food chain, a herbivore eats the plant, a carnivore eats that herbivore, another carnivore eats that carnivore, and finally, this last guy eats the snake or eats that carnivore. So this is an opportunity for me to talk about trophic levels. Well, first we'll do the primary consumer. So producers, primary consumers eat the producers. Then you got secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. Tertiary is just like a nerdy way of saying the third. And then quaternary consumers is the fourth level. All right. As far as the trophic levels go, remember that word. This would be the first, the second, third, fourth, and fifth. Now, the top of the food chain is also sometimes called the top carnivore. So in this particular food chain, this eagle or whatever you would say that is, maybe it's not an eagle, it's probably a hawk, would be considered the top carnivore. Same with we look at this marine or aquatic food chain here. We have the phytoplankton at the bottom. That's the producer. The zooplankton eats it. These types of small fish eat the zooplankton. This carnivore eats them. And then finally, we got the killer whale at the top. That would be the top carnivore. Follows the same sort of pattern. Just examples of food chains. These aren't the only food chains, obviously, but these are examples of food chains. And the amount of energy is passed on up that food chain. Do I need to say anything else about that? Probably not. Those are food chains. In reality, each individual organism is involved in many food chains, and they all interlock with each other in a relationship called a food web. And here's an example of a food web. So you've got a bunch of green plants here at the bottom. It has to be the base of any food web. And from there, you've got different things feeding off them, which would all be different primary consumers, primary consumer, primary consumer. And then you've got the secondary consumers eating those animals, things like the weasel, things like the shrew apparently is eating those bugs. You could consider that to be a secondary consumer. The bat eating the bugs. And then the owl would be your top carnivore, or in some food chains, they'd be the secondary consumer, and they'd be the tertiary consumer, the third trophic level in some food chains. So out of that, you could pick out a food chain. Like if I just go up, let's say the side here in this food web. So green plants to the hare or rabbit to the owl, right? Out of that food web, you can gather one food chain, and this one has just 3 trophic levels, a first, second, and third trophic level. So if you're asked to make a food chain, you're just looking from one organism to the next, plants to the hare, hare to the owl. If you're looking to design a food web, then you're taking multiple food chains and connecting them together in this web. Is that the last thing I have here? No, not quite. Well, there's that picture again, and we're not gonna look at that guy. There's that picture again. This is a decent food web. You've got multiple producers at the bottom of the food chain, and you can see how they're all connected as they go up. How the deer feeds on the berries and the flowers, and then the grizzly bear eats the deer. There's a food chain right there. You can see also how the decomposers, they put energy back into the food chain. I don't even necessarily like where it's positioned. It's not real clear. So like when the bear dies, they go to the decomposer. When the deer dies of natural causes, or even whatever's left over after the bear gets it, they all go to the decomposers, which actually puts them back into the plants. They actually put the energy back into the soil so that the plants can survive and grow and get the nutrients that they need for building things. So that's your quick lesson on, again, ecology, actually all of biology, as I've said in the past, lots and lots and lots of terminology. So when you're assessed on this stuff, a lot of your assessment is going to be based on, do you know what these words mean? And can you use them appropriately? So that's what's going to be, that's what you're in for at the end of these few days of ecosystems. So let me just go back to this here and see what's in store for you in this third learning block here. So this is still going to be on the 11th, and we're looking at block 3, and it's on food chains and food webs. I'm going to go into edit mode so I can look at it a little more easily. So not a lot here. It is a longish block of learning to do. And you're going to be doing this note, which I allotted 25 minutes for it, but take as much time as you need. And and then I have this food chain, food web exercise for you guys to work on. And I think saying that it's going to take just 40 minutes might not do it justice. So read the instructions. Like, it might take longer than that, and that's fine. Just try and get it done by the end of the day. We still have a fourth block to look at anyways. So it wants you just to label the producers, the herbivores, the carnivores, the omnivores, the decomposers on the diagram. Now, the main challenge I've had with doing this with students before is there's some things that they're like, well, what the heck is that? But you should, for the most part, be able to label it as a producer, consumer, or decomposer. Whether or not you know exactly what the name of it is or not. If you're really stuck, again, the Google Meet link will be active, so you can pop on and ask me. You can also email me if you're more comfortable asking me questions that way. I'm just going to be sitting here waiting to help you guys essentially all day. Unless I'm on prep or on lunch, I might be away from the computer. But most of these things you should be able to identify. The few that you can't, don't worry about it. Just do the best you can. Take a guess, right? Because in the end of this, you're going to be making food chains, making food webs. So it says create a food web that has 2 producers, 4 primary consumers, 2 secondary consumers, 1 top carnivore, 1 decomposer from these pictures. Or it says you can make up your own. If you don't like that, or you weren't able to identify the things that you need to, then just make up your own. So that's going to be what you hand in. This block is going to be a picture of that. And then part 2 says, a student observes several organisms in a terrestrial community over a period of 1 month. She constructs a food web similar to the one shown below. 1 year later, she discovers that all the foxes have been killed by a hunter. Explain what effect the loss of the foxes would have on the populations of grass, rabbits, and deer. So a separate answer for each. Now that one's a bit of a thinking question, so you may have to jump on and ask me for help with that one, which would be totally fine. That's what I'm here for. So let me just get out of this for now. That's your task for this learning block, is just to go through and do that and hand it in once you're done. You can attach a picture of your work to this, because I assume you're going to want to do this on paper. It's hard to do a food chain or a food web on your screen, but if you have the ability to do that, then go right ahead and do it. I'll accept that as well. It says the assignment's out of 100, but that's just the default. I don't know how much it's going to be out of just yet. I'm going to wait and see what you guys turn in, and once I start marking it, I'll get a better idea of what it is. If you're a little unsure of yourself and you want to ask me, like, whether or not it looks good or not. If you have it all done in terms of what the food web looks like, or if you want to discuss your answers to that second question with me, that's totally fine. And I can help you with that as needed, okay? But I think that will do it for now. So I'm going to sign off and just keep the questions coming if you need anything.